September 25th, 1906. I had my interview this morning and I was very nervous, and I'm not sure how well I did. The day started poorly, drizzling, the murky streets, threatening the cleanliness of my boots and skirt bottom. I had to walk halfway across town to where I could catch the crowded streetcar up to 14th Street. From there, I hurried over to Union Square, the department's squat brick building. Just inside, people pushed past as I dabbed my wet face, trying to muster my confidence. I strode purposefully into the wide hall, though I wasn't sure where I was going. On the first floor to the left, stenciled in the glass, I saw the name of my interviewer, Mr. George Soper, sanitary engineer. I stood for a moment, trying to gather my nerve. Across the hall, behind the windowed doorway, I could see the busy activity of men who, thankfully, took no notice of me. I knocked and entered my interviewer's office. He was sitting behind the desk and looked remarkably like Mr. Robert Perry, even down to his dark mustache with the part of his hair in a very straight line of his jaw. He indicated the coat rack, and I hung my damp hat and cape and bowed my head and said, he bowed his head and said, "Please take a seat." To his right, to his right was a desk. On it, a brand new Remington typing machine. I sat behind it. The size of the deep wooden desk nearly overwhelmed me. I wondered if I had what it took to fill the position. I felt as if my mouth were stuffed with rags and my back soaked by rain showers. "Please type these paragraphs," he said, handing me a sheet of paper. He took out a pocket watch. He nodded, and I swallowed the nugget of fear in my throat. My clothes felt tight and my hands weak as I performed on the stiff new keys. In 1 minute, he stopped me. He pulled out the page of the machine. He glanced on it, laid it on his desk, and sat down. I stared at the strong bone of his jaw and his muscle flexing there. I looked at his smoothly oiled hair, his crisp bow tie. I wondered what sort of home he lived in and what his wife might look like if he had one. Beneath his brow, he seemed to be studying me as well. He tapped his desk slowly with his finger. "Your letter to me was a fine specimen of handwriting," he said. "Thank you, sir," I said. "The work demands a good hand," he said. "Yes, sir." He cleared his throat and picked up my typing test. I raked my mind for a way to ask him about the job and what it might entail. I tried to call up words, but they seemed as ephemeral as clouds. "So, I have all the information, name, address, and such," he said. He stood as if to end the meeting, and then it came to me. "Sir, did the Department of Health and the Sanitation begin after Jacob Riis published his book, How the Other Half Lives?" His eyes flickered to life then, as if I had brought him out of a dull routine. 20 years ago, the department was in its infancy," he said. "We didn't have such a branch for sanitation. I've always been interested in, fighting death," I said, clutching my own hands, not daring to wipe the sweat from my upper lip. "The causes of death are many," he said. "Disease, ill health, accidents, and childbirth." "My mother's a midwife," I said, "and I assist her as often as I watch those girls suffer. And my brother, I want to learn, sir. I want to know what makes people ill, what causes sores to become infected, and why people bleed when they die." I felt unable to stop this horrible declaration of the most morbid thoughts, but the man nodded, looking at me pensively. "Perhaps I should show you our laboratory," he said. "It's where we do all of our experiments and sample testing. You'd be working often with the science fellows, so perhaps you should see. Come, it's just down the hall." I followed him to the other end of the hall into the laboratory, a giant room astonishing in its size and complication. Dozens of tools and test tubes and microscopes, things I wanted to touch and look at. I could smell chemicals burning in the beakers. A good number of science fellows bent over tables, their work occupying them until I passed with Mr. Soper. As I listened to my interviewer, I felt watched. I felt aware of my face and my hair, and I felt light and off balance. I don't think I've ever been in a room with so many boys before. I forced myself to focus on Mr. Soper's words. He stopped at the microscope and tapped it. He said, "Every living thing in the world is made up of tiny cells that are invisible to the bare eye, cells that one can only see through a microscope." I thought of the article I'd read with Marm about Dr. Golgi and the nervous cells. I thought about the science book my father gave me. I felt, listening to my interview, as if a door opened just a crack. I could see the edge of the new world. I wanted to ask if I could look through the bronze microscope he touched to see how they are held together, or how we are held together. I wanted to stay in the room for the rest of the day and explore like an Arctic adventurer. A microscope is just one of the many tools we use, he said. My position in the department is head epidemiologist, and a large part of our work is investigating the causes of disease epidemics. We want to know how these things start. This struck me, that there exists a person who searches for the start of disease, not a doctor, but more like a detective sifting through scientific evidence. I'm ready, sir, to help in any way I can, I said. Good, he said. I think I saw him smile. He had to return to work. We went back to his office, and he offered to pay me $5 weekly if hired. That is more money than I have ever had. It would make our lives a good bit easier. We closed the meeting with a firm handshake. He said he'd notify me of his decision by next week. It seems I'm not the only person available to do this job, but I know I'm certainly the most interested.